I never thought moving back into my dad's old cabin would come with so much drama. At first, it felt like a dream, waking up to the sound of the lake, the smell of pine trees drifting through the morning air, coffee in hand while the porch creaked under my boots. This place had been in my family for decades. Every board, every nail, every scratch on the dock carried some memory of my childhood. But that peace didn't last long. One morning, as I was unloading boxes from my truck, I heard sharp footsteps crunching through the grass behind me. When I turned, I saw her, a woman in her late 40s, blonde hair pulled back too tight, clutching a clipboard like it was a weapon. She marched right up my steps without even asking and barked, "You need to leave this property immediately." For a second, I thought she was joking. I actually laughed, waiting for the punchline. But no, she was dead serious, waving papers in the air like she was serving eviction papers. "This land," she said, "falls under Maplewood Heights HOA jurisdiction. Your cabin doesn't meet our standards and you're in violation of community codes." She shoved the paper into my hand. A violation notice, complete with a $75 fine. Now, I don't know about you, but if someone tried to find me on my own porch, on land my father built with his bare hands, I'd be furious. And that's exactly how I felt, caught between laughing in her face and exploding on the spot. "Ma'am," I said, trying to stay calm, "this is my family's cabin. We've owned it for over 40 years. Your rules don't apply here." I pointed to the cabin behind me, its weathered wood proving it wasn't some flashy lake house added last year. This place had history, roots. Her name, I later learned, was Karen Miller, and trust me, the name fit. Karen shook her head like I was the one out of touch. "All properties visible from the community waterfront fall under HOA jurisdiction. That includes this structure." She called my cabin a structure like it was some kind of eyesore instead of a home. The arrogance was almost impressive. "Visible from the waterfront?" I asked. "So what, anything you can see belongs to you now?" She doubled down. "Community standards are non-negotiable. We can't have private cabins disrupting the uniform. Look of Maplewood Heights, that's..." When I pulled out a letter from the county utility company, the one clearly stating my address was outside HOA boundaries. I held it up for her to see. She glanced at it for half a second before brushing it off. "Administrative error. We're already working with the county to correct those boundaries." That confidence and that absolute certainty in her voice, it was unreal. She was making things up on the spot, and she sounded like she truly believed them. Then, as if the universe wanted to add its own soundtrack, a cheap wind chime clanked from across the cove, right where their neighborhood had strung up a bright orange "no trespassing" sign. The irony hit me hard. Karen was standing on my porch, claiming control of my lake access, while her side of the water literally had keep-out signs nailed up. That's when I pulled out my phone and hit record, because who in their right mind would believe this story without proof? "So," I said into the camera, "you're telling me your HOA owns the water in front of my dock?" Karen straightened up, trying to look even more official now that she was on video. "The HOA has environmental oversight that extends to all waterfront properties impacting community aesthetics." I almost laughed again. Aesthetics? She was claiming authority over the lake itself in the name of looks. I panned my phone to show the dock, the anchor ring my dad had bolted into the wood back in the 60s, the clear space separating my cabin from their subdivision. Then I zoomed back in on Karen's face. This wasn't about community safety. It wasn't about the environment. This was about control, pure and simple, and the only question left in my mind was, just how far was Karen Miller willing to go to try and take it? A few days later, I walked down to the dock with my coffee and nearly spit it out when I saw what they'd done. Somebody had stretched a bright yellow plastic barrier right across my water access. Not close to it, not near it, directly across it. And the kicker? They'd chained it to my dad's old steel anchor ring like it belonged to them. For a second, I just stood there in my flannel pajamas, staring at it, hoping maybe I was half asleep. But no, it was real. Karen's HOA had trespassed onto my property and set up a blockade like they were marking territory. This wasn't some flimsy rope either. It was one of those heavy-duty silt curtains contractors use during water projects. But there was no construction anywhere around the lake. This wasn't about safety. This was about cutting me off. Tied tight, reinforced with metal stakes, laminated signs zip-tied along the plastic. One read, "Temporary Environmental Protection Measure, HOA Authorization to KV 2407, the date, 2 days ago, meaning they'd snuck onto my property while I was gone and set this whole thing up like it was official. That's when I remembered Dad's old toolbox, still sitting by the porch. I popped it open and there they were, his bolt cutters. Heavy, worn, and built for work. Dad always said, sometimes you gotta handle problems head on. And this was definitely one of those times. I walked back down, set the cutters on the first cable, and gave them a squeeze. Snap. The metal popped like a gunshot, and the barrier sagged immediately. The current grabbed it and started dragging it downstream. Watching it drift away felt good. Really good. Like justice, but of course I didn't even get a minute to enjoy it. Hey, what do you think you're doing? I turned, bolt cutters still in hand, and there she was again, Karen Miller, storming down the path with 2 board members behind her. Clipboards, phones out, witnesses, reinforcements. I'm removing garbage somebody chained to my dock, I said, trying to keep calm even though my blood was boiling. Karen's face turned bright red. That barrier was protecting the lake from erosion. You just destroyed community safety equipment. The lie rolled right off her tongue, and her little entourage nodded along like background singers. But anyone could see the barrier wasn't protecting anything. It was just blocking my dock. Then, in a move I still can't believe, her tone softened. She tucked her hair behind her ear, dropped her voice, and said, "Look, we don't have to fight. I'll write you a check right now. $200. All you need to do is move that anchor ring about 5 feet toward the shore. Easy fix." She actually pulled out a checkbook right there on my dock, like she was buying groceries. The insult of it hit me harder than her yelling. She was trying to buy my property out from under me, with pocket change. I dropped the cutters on the dock with a loud clank and stared her down. "This anchor's been here longer than your subdivision. It's not moving. Not for you, not for your HOA, and definitely not for $200. Her friendly mask slipped instantly. She snapped the checkbook shut and hissed, "Fine, but by refusing, you're putting lives at risk. That anchor is critical for our fire safety system. If something happens, that'll be on you." Another bold-faced lie, said loud enough for her board members to hear so it sounded official. Never mind that my dock is 50 feet from their property. And the fire department confirmed years ago they've never used private docks for emergencies. I didn't argue. I just pulled out my phone and recorded her. Every word, every lie. By then the barrier had fully broken loose and was drifting across the lake like a giant yellow raft. Karen stood there fuming, her safety measure floating away while her backup shifted awkwardly, realizing they'd just watched their leader try intimidation, bribery, and fear-mongering all in under 10 minutes. "This isn't over," she muttered, glaring at me as she turned back toward Maplewood Heights. I stood by the dock, looking at Dad's old anchor ring, and for the first time since moving back, I felt a strange sense of pride. Dad was right. Sometimes the simplest solution is the right one. No waiting, no overthinking. Just clear your own path. The lake was calm again, but I knew, deep down, it wouldn't stay that way for long. It didn't stop with notices and fines. It got worse, slow, sneaky, and personal. Karen's little habit of showing up at odd hours turned into a full-time hobby. She'd stroll past my house at dawn, linger by the gate at dusk, snap pictures through the window while pretending to check the streetlight. Every time she did it, Max, my dog, would bristle and growl, and she hated that more than anything. A big, calm dog made her clipboard look pointless. At first I treated it like petty nonsense. Another letter, another flimsy citation. But then they started coming with more frequency and nastier details. A fine for a porch bulb that wasn't the right warm white. Another for the temporary flag I'd hung before I had a proper mount. A $100 citation for a wind chime my late wife loved. That last one stung. She'd found a way to weaponize everything. Neighbors started to watch, but mostly in secret. A few whispered that Karen had bullied them before. Fined a veteran for a flagpole on Memorial Day. Threatened a family over kids' bikes left for 5 minutes. Most of them were too scared to speak up. She loved that. People fall in line faster when they're afraid of the consequences. She wasn't subtle. She'd stand with a telephoto lens in the alley, crouched behind hedges for a better angle. She'd jiggle my gate latch at night, testing it, like she wanted to find a reason to call it in. The first time it happened, I thought maybe it was kids. The second time, I was suspicious. By the third, I knew she had no shame about crossing lines. I tried talking to her once face to face. She was on my property again, clipboard in hand, acting like the world's most polite inspector. Routine perimeter inspection, she lied. I stepped up and told her straight. This is my yard. Stay off it. She sniffed like she'd smelled insolence. You'll regret being difficult, Mr. Lawson, she muttered, and stormed off. That's when I started keeping every letter in a folder. Proof, a timeline, evidence. If she wanted a war, I was going to keep receipts. The pattern continued, more letters, more late-night prowling, more neighbors admitting off-camera they'd been on the receiving end. A few offered help quietly. Jim, the neighbor 2 doors down, said he'd keep an eye on things while I was on the road. I appreciated it, but honestly, I didn't expect her to go that far. Still, when a job pulled me away for 3 days, a hair on the back of my neck told me to leave Rex at home. I double-checked the locks, left Jim a spare key, and asked him to check the place once a day. She's bold, I told him. Don't be surprised if you see her snooping. He laughed it off, but I could tell he was taking it seriously. The first night I was gone, Jim messaged me. She was on the porch, checking the railing. Rex barked, she bolted. The second night, lights on by your place, someone prowling. My pulse tightened with every text. On the third day, the one I'd been dreading came in 2 words. Came inside. I slammed the accelerator all the way back to town. The highway blurred beneath me, but my head was clear with one thought. Not a thing would be moved until I saw it myself. As I turned onto our road and saw the gate wide open, something cold climbed into my stomach. That gate never sat open unless someone was careless, or someone wanted me to think it was. I ran up the path, swung the porch door, and heard the faint shuffle of paper inside. The living room light was low, the beam of a flashlight cutting across shelves, and there she was, Karen, actually riffling through my drawers like it was her right. Her blazer looked out of place in my home, her clipboard a ridiculous shield. Between her and the door stood Rex, bigger than most dogs on the street, lean and trained, not aggressive but fierce in his focus. He didn't bark, he didn't lunge, he just held the space like a wall. His posture said the same thing a police badge says, don't push it. Karen froze, flashlight wobbling. She squeaked the thing everyone with power says when they realize the jig's up. I'm just conducting an inspection. Her voice sounded thin in my house. You don't have the right to be in here, I said, stepping through the doorway. You walked in. You're trespassing. I kept my voice low. There were neighbors gathering outside by then, phones already up, people curious and finally done being afraid. Rex sat, watching her. He didn't snap. He didn't need to. He only needed to be in the way. He was trained, disciplined. He let her know with his eyes that any move would have serious consequences. That changed everything. Instead of the confident HOA queen, she was a startled trespasser. Her face lost color. She tried soft words. I'm the president, I was checking complaints. But her posture was pleading, not commanding. I told her to stay put and called the police. I could hear a murmur through the windows. Neighbors, the hum of their phones. She stammered, You're humiliating me. I smiled and said, You started by harassing this whole street. Officer Daniels showed up with the kind of calm that makes people tell the truth faster. He asked the basic questions, looked at the folder I handed him, all the fines, the notices, the photos of her peering into windows. He listened while Karen tried her performance. In the end, he simply said what I'd been trying to explain for months. You can't just break into someone's home because you think you have power. They let her out in handcuffs. Not a dramatic movie arrest, more bureaucratic than that, but enough to take her clipboard away and put a dent in the armor she'd built. The neighbors cheered quietly, like they'd been waiting for permission to breathe again. The next morning felt different. People came by with stories they'd kept to themselves for years. Turns out she'd been doing this to more than just me. One woman said Karen fined her for flying a flag. Another kid's bike got a citation. Evidence piled up like a small avalanche. The neighborhood, finally seeing the pattern with fresh eyes, started to organize. Karen's act collapsed under the weight of proof. The board called a meeting, tempers flared, and within weeks she was stripped of her title. The petitions, the leaked invoices for emergency projects, the neighbors' statements, it all added up. They couldn't keep pretending it was about standards when it was obvious she'd been weaponizing them. I didn't press charges in the end. Letting the community see what she'd done, live and unedited, seemed punishment enough. But I did show up at the meeting with every letter she'd sent me, laid them on the table and told them what I wanted, an apology, voided fines, and a promise that no one else would be bullied. They agreed. They signed things. They fixed the broken process that had let one person get away with a ton of bad behavior. And in the evenings after, I'd sit on my porch with Rex at my feet, watching kids play and neighbors wave. The fear had been replaced with something small but steady: trust. After Karen was hauled off that night, I thought maybe things would calm down. Maybe the HOA would back off now that their fearless leader had been caught trespassing red-handed. But if you've ever dealt with people like her, you know they don't just disappear. They find new ways to claw back control. A week later, I was sipping coffee on the porch when Tom Reynolds, my dad's old fishing buddy and a guy I'd trusted my whole life, came shuffling up the path. He had that look on his face like he was carrying bad news. He sat down heavy in the chair beside me, staring into his mug like it had answers. "Danny," he said finally, "we got to talk about this situation with Karen." The word situation made my jaw tighten. "What kind of situation?" I asked. Tom sighed and shifted in his seat. "She's been telling the board you're escalating things. That you're set up with the cameras, the live stream, even the dog. That it's making the neighborhood uneasy. She showed me some papers, county documents saying there are new rules about waterfront access and fire safety. And," he hesitated, "some folks are starting to wonder if she might be right." That hit harder than I expected. Tom had helped my dad sink that anchor ring in the dock 40 years ago. He'd spent countless nights around this cabin. If Karen could get him to question me, she could get anybody. "Tom," I said, leaning forward, "you know this land. You know Dad wouldn't let anybody tell him where to put an anchor or how to run his cabin. You think my father would have bowed to some HOA president waving papers?" He rubbed his forehead, looking older than I'd ever seen him. "I know, Danny, I do. But she had documents." She sounded convincing. "And people are tired of the fighting. They just want it to end. That was her move. Convince the reasonable folks with half-truths and official-sounding language until they folded. Get them so worn down they'd rather give in than keep pushing back." "Tom," I said slowly, "if she's got real paperwork, let's check it with the county. If I'm wrong, I'll admit it. But if she's making it up, we both need to stop her from dragging everyone down with her." Tom gave me a long look, then nodded. "Fair enough. Call the county. If you're right, I'll back you up." So I did. I got on the phone with the county fire marshal's office and explained everything. The anchor ring, the so-called safety barrier, the claim that the HOA had authority over my dock. The guy on the other end didn't even hesitate. "Sir, there are no federal or county regulations granting an HOA control over private docks on this lake. None. If someone told you otherwise, they're misrepresenting the law." Hearing it confirmed in plain English was like a weight lifting off my chest. I thanked him, hung up, and told Tom. He let out a breath like he'd been holding it all week. "Guess she's not as convincing when someone checks her work," he muttered with a small grin. That call changed everything for me. It wasn't just about fighting Karen anymore. It was about proving step by step that her whole act was smoke and mirrors. She wasn't some unstoppable authority. She was just loud and manipulative. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with Dad's old notebook, flipping through pages of water tests and maintenance notes he'd kept over the years. His handwriting, steady and patient, reminded me of something important. The truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be written down and backed up. So I ordered a professional-grade water testing kit online. If Karen wanted to play the environmental safety card, I'd beat her at her own game. I'd get real results, documented and time-stamped, and share them with the community. No spin, no lies. Just facts. When the kit arrived a few days later, I walked the shoreline like Dad used to, dipping bottles at different spots, labeling each one carefully, taking pictures for proof. It felt less like defending myself and more like honoring him. And deep down, I knew once I had those results in my hands, Karen's story would finally start to crumble. The water test kit gave me everything I needed to settle the argument once and for all. I spent the next few mornings walking the shoreline, filling sample bottles, logging dates and times, taking photos of every spot I dipped into the lake. It wasn't glamorous work, but it felt solid, something my dad would have approved of. Facts don't lie. When the results came back a week later, they told the story clear as day. The water by my dock was clean. Cleaner, in fact, than the samples pulled from the Maplewood Heights side of the cove. My shoreline wasn't polluting anything. If anything, their manicured lawns and storm drains were more of a threat to the lake than my old cabin. I printed the results, slipped them into a binder, and felt ready for the next round. Didn't take long. Karen showed up at the edge of my driveway the very next afternoon, clipboard tucked under her arm and that same smug look plastered on her face. She called out before even stepping foot on my property. "Mr. Lawson, the board has reviewed your ongoing violations, and I've been authorized to offer you a compromise." That word, compromise, made my stomach turn. She opened her folder and pulled out glossy charts and highlighted documents. Independent testing confirms elevated contaminants in this area of the shoreline. Your cabin and dock appear to be the cause. If you agree to relocate your anchor and update your structure to community standards, we're willing to waive a portion of your outstanding fines. It was a performance, polished and rehearsed. But here's the thing, I recognize those documents. She'd lifted the template straight off a state environmental website and slapped a Maplewood Heights logo on top. The charts were generic, the dates didn't match, and the signatures looked suspiciously like her own handwriting. I held up my binder, flipping it open so she could see the stamped, lab-certified results. Funny, because according to an actual test from an actual lab, the water by my dock is cleaner than the water by your subdivision. Care to explain that? Her smirk faltered for the first time. She glanced at my papers, then snapped her folder shut. "Those results aren't valid. You don't have the proper authority to conduct testing." I laughed. Couldn't help it. "Authority? Lady, clean water is clean water. The difference is I can prove mine." Her jaw tightened. She leaned in, lowering her voice like we were cutting a deal in some back alley. "Look, you can fight me if you want, but this will drag on for months. Or you take the deal. Move the anchor, repaint the cabin, and we'll all move on." I stepped closer, binder still in hand. "This cabin isn't moving. The anchor isn't moving. And I sure as hell don't answer to you." She straightened her blazer, plastered the smug look back on, and said, "Then you leave me no choice." With that, she turned on her heel and marched back toward Maplewood Heights. I knew what was coming next. More letters. More fake documents. More attempts to grind me down until I either caved or made a mistake. But this time I wasn't just reacting. I had proof. Hard evidence. And if she wanted to escalate, I'd be ready, because now it wasn't just about my cabin. It was about showing everyone else she'd been bluffing from the start. By then I had stacks of evidence. Water test results, boundary maps from the county, photos of the barrier she'd chained to my dock, and recordings of every lie she told straight to my face. It wasn't enough to just defend myself anymore. People needed to see the whole picture, laid out from start to finish. So I cleared off the dining table, set up my laptop, a cheap mic, and a couple of lamps for lighting, and turned my living room into a makeshift studio. I wasn't planning to rant or scream into the camera. I wanted this to feel calm, steady, undeniable. On Saturday morning, I went live. I started at the beginning. The violation notice, the so-called HOA jurisdiction, the barrier, the bribe, the fake test results. One by one, I showed documents on screen, zoomed in on dates, played clips of Karen contradicting herself. I spoke plain and simple, letting the facts tell the story, and it worked. Neighbors began chiming in through the chat. At first, just comments. "Yeah, she fined me for a garden gnome once. She threatened to tow my car for parking in my own driveway." But then people started uploading their own receipts, scanned minutes from board meetings, old violation letters, even canceled checks for fines that had never been officially logged. One retired engineer shared diagrams proving the floodlights they'd installed weren't about safety at all. They were aimed directly at my cabin. Another neighbor uploaded a county report showing HOA funds had been spent on emergency projects nobody remembered voting on. The chat turned into a flood of proof. And it wasn't just me anymore. The story had grown bigger than one cabin or one dock. It was about the way the whole neighborhood was being run. By that evening, we'd scheduled a community live stream for Tuesday night. Open to anyone, transparent, nothing hidden. Experts would be invited to weigh in. A retired county inspector, a lawyer who lived 3 blocks over, even a couple of environmental scientists willing to fact-check claims in real time. 43 neighbors RSVP'd within 24 hours. People who'd been quiet for years were suddenly ready to speak. That's when Karen panicked. She called an emergency board meeting on Sunday night, framing our effort as a smear campaign against her environmental initiatives. She tried to paint me, and anyone supporting me, as dangerous outsiders working against community safety. It was classic Karen. Flipped the script before the truth could settle. But here's the thing. People had already seen the truth. They'd watched the live stream. They'd compared notes in the chat. They'd pulled their own paperwork out of dusty filing cabinets and realized they weren't alone. For the first time, it wasn't just me standing against her. It was the neighborhood, and when someone like Karen feels the ground shifting under their feet, they don't go quietly. They double down. The question wasn't whether she'd fight back. It was how far she'd go now that her mask was starting to slip. Tuesday night finally came, and the energy felt different from anything I'd ever seen in Maplewood Heights. People were nervous, sure, but they were also ready. Ready to talk, ready to listen, ready to finally push back. For years, Karen had been the loudest voice in the room, but that night she wasn't holding the mic. I started the stream right on time. The numbers climbed higher than I expected. Not just the 43 neighbors who RSVP'd, but dozens more. Folks who'd been quiet for years were suddenly tuning in, their usernames popping up in the chat one after another. I laid everything out in order, steady and simple. The boundary maps from the county showing my cabin outside HOA jurisdiction. The certified water test results proving my shoreline was clean. Photos of the barrier chained to my dock. Screenshots of her official documents with mismatched dates and signatures. It was all there, lined up so no one could miss the pattern. Then I handed it over to the neighbors. A retired county inspector explained that HOAs have no authority to enforce environmental rules without state approval. An environmental scientist chimed in, pointing out that Karen's supposed contamination readings were copied from a generic state template, not real local data. Even a lawyer from our own street spoke up, saying half the fines Karen had been handing out were legally unenforceable. The chat lit up like fireworks. People started sharing their own stories live. A veteran fined for flying a flag. A family charged for a swing set. Someone else forced to repaint their house because Karen said the color was too distracting. It wasn't just me anymore. The community could finally see the bigger picture. Halfway through the meeting, the board's official Zoom account tried to break in. And sure enough, there she was. Karen Miller, front and center, dressed sharp like she was walking into court. She launched right into it. "This entire broadcast is misinformation," she snapped. "Mr. Lawson is misleading you all. The HOA has every right to enforce community safety, and anyone supporting this spectacle is undermining years of progress." But this time she wasn't getting nods and applause. She was getting questions. Real pointed questions from neighbors who weren't afraid anymore. "Where are the receipts for the emergency projects?" someone asked. "Why are fines showing up on our accounts that never got board approval?" Another added. "Why does every emergency seem to expand your power?" Karen tried to keep her composure, but the cracks were showing. Her answers got shorter, sharper, less convincing by the minute. Every time she waved her clipboard or claimed authority, someone in the chat would post a screenshot proving otherwise. Finally, one of the quieter board members spoke up, a woman named Sarah, who had barely said a word in meetings before. "I've been on this board for 3 years, she said, her voice shaking at first but growing stronger as she spoke. "Half the things Karen pushed through we never even voted on. She called them urgent and told us we had no choice. But after seeing this evidence, I can't defend it anymore." That moment hit like a hammer. The chat exploded with support, neighbors clapping in their windows, some even stepping outside to cheer. For the first time, Karen looked small. Not in size, but in presence. She wasn't untouchable anymore. She snapped the Zoom off before it was over, but the damage was done. The board was split, the neighbors were awake, and her grip on the community was slipping fast. As I signed off that night, I leaned back in my chair, Rex curled at my feet, and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. But I also knew people like Karen don't walk away quietly. If she was cornered, she'd fight even harder. And the real showdown was still coming. The morning after the live stream, Maplewood Heights felt lighter. People waved as I walked Rex down the street. Neighbors who had avoided eye contact for months stopped to chat, even thanked me. For the first time in a long time, it felt like the community was standing together instead of bowing to Karen's clipboard. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to back down just because the truth was out. If anything, she was more dangerous now, a cornered animal clawing for control. Sure enough, by Friday, a new letter showed up in my mailbox. This one was different. Glossy paper, official-looking stamps, the works. At the top it read, Emergency Authority Expansion Act, Maplewood Heights HOA. According to her, the board had voted to give her unilateral powers to resolve ongoing disputes with non-compliant properties. It was pure nonsense. Nothing more than her trying to grant herself king-like authority. But the fact that she was still pushing told me she wasn't finished. That night I saw the glow of floodlights flicker on across the cove. Not just one or two, but a whole line of them, brighter than ever, aimed straight at my cabin like a spotlight. The message was clear. I'm still here. I'm still in control. I pulled out my phone and filmed the whole thing, not with anger this time, but with calm, steady narration. This is what happens when someone loses control of the story. They double down. They push harder. But light doesn't just expose one person. It exposes everyone. Neighbors started filming too. Within hours, social media was flooded with clips of the ridiculous setup, people mocking it, comparing it to a prison yard. The joke was no longer on me. It was on her. By Monday, the board called an emergency meeting of their own, this time without Karen in charge. Word spread fast and nearly the entire neighborhood showed up, crammed into the community hall. The room buzzed with energy. You could feel years of pent-up frustration ready to boil over. Karen walked in last, her usual confident stride a little shakier now. She carried her clipboard like a shield, but it didn't carry the same weight anymore. One by one, neighbors stood up and spoke. About the fines, about the intimidation, about the fake documents, about how she'd twisted emergencies into excuses to grab more power. Every voice chipped away at her facade until it wasn't a wall anymore, just rubble. When it was my turn, I stood with Rex at my side and placed the binder of evidence on the table. I didn't need to raise my voice. I just flipped through page after page, showing what everyone had already seen on the live stream. The barrier, the forged test results, the trespassing. This isn't about rules or safety, I said. It's about control, and we all deserve better. For once, the board didn't look at her for guidance. They looked at the community. They looked at each other, and then they voted. By a clear majority, Karen Miller was stripped of her position as HOA president effective immediately. The room erupted. Some clapped, some cried. Others just let out the kind of relieved laugh you make when a storm finally passes. Karen, red-faced and trembling, tried to protest, but her words drowned in the noise of neighbors who had found their voices again. She left that hall alone. No clipboard, no authority, no crowd behind her. Just a woman who had finally pushed too far. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood shifted. The new board promised transparency, open votes, and real community input. Fines were reviewed, bogus charges wiped clean, and people started fixing up their homes with pride again instead of fear. As for me, I went back to mornings on the porch. Coffee in hand, Rex stretched out at my feet. The lake looked the same as it always had, calm and steady. But I saw it differently now, not just as my home, but as proof that sometimes you have to stand your ground, even when the odds seem stacked against you, because bullies only win if you let them. And once people see the truth, their power is gone. That chapter of Maplewood Heights was over, and for the first time in a long while, peace felt real.